Week 42 of the Crafty concept, and this week I'm here to talk to you about how we fade away from concrete concepts like set ideas, visual examples that you can see, that you can touch, reference points, towards more abstraction, the deeper level of processing, the harder thought that pertains to the strongest level of learning. Always referring back, of course, to the intersection that the Crafty concept provides between the learning environment that you set, the learning design, the choices you make within the learning environment, and learning critique, how you actually assess progress, development, schema development, knowledge, understanding, ideas. Fading away from concrete sense of learning towards abstraction, because abstraction is application in varied settings, is performance. Learning always begins with something concrete. It's something tangible that can be held, can be seen, it's visible. It's something that's known. But to truly understand and to reason or to create and apply in varied, flexible settings, the kind of concepts that are indicative of our highest performing learners, those with the greatest level of processing, the deepest structural understanding of the concept, then we've got to move beyond the surface. Now, many times over and over again, we see how the cyclical nature of educational psychology comes around, of the fact that the deeper level of processing, the higher the amount of schema, the greater the amount of schema, the easier and more flexibly you can apply from the long-term memory. But of course, in the background at all times, we have John Sweller's seminal work on cognitive load theory. And once again, it's no surprise that that's going to be coming up today. The idea of fading away from the tangible, from the concrete, from the thing that you can see, that you can touch, the blocks that we've drawn on the board to represent numbers, towards just having the number 5. That gradual shift that we have, moving away from those representations towards the more, holding the more abstract and being able to apply the abstract in thought alone, that is what the fading away of concreteness means in educational psychology. It's a process really of cognitive scaffolding. Yes, we need those scaffolds to be there to support our learners. We know what Barat Rosenshine told us about how important a high level of success rate, 80% success rate, is required to help stimulate learning and continue that intrinsic motivation towards the learning goal. And to do so, those scaffolds need to be in place in support of our learners. Classroom colleagues, teachers, we know that those scaffolds are so important for our SEND pupils, of which diagnoses, as all of us know, are quite dramatically on the rise. We need to be shown to be modelling, to be scaffolding and supporting those pupils in a way that best supports their unique learning needs. So learners start with something they can see, touch, feel, visualise, a model, an image, an example, a scenario, a movement pattern that they can see. But we need to guide them to grasp the deeper level of patterns and principles that lie beneath. The crafted concept, the crafted instructor, knows that that abstraction brings the greatest amount of progress for our learners, the greatest amount of growth. But the art lies in the gentle fade, the removing of those scaffolds piece by piece in a manner which best supports your learners. Knowing when to move away from those scaffolds is the art form that we're going to be discovering this week. To summarize then, the idea of fading away from concrete, tangible example is at its heart about respecting the learner's cognitive journey. We begin with something experiential, something tangible, something visible, and help our learners to observe the thing that we're trying to teach through it. We then go from the visible towards the more invisible, from what can be just parroted or copied towards something that can be flexibly applied and lead to creation of solutions. Deep learning happens when the learner transcends the example. The example is not the learning, it is what the example has given us, allowed us to encode, and allowed us to apply to varied settings in the future. When those scaffolds that we have put in place as great instructors start to dissolve, what's left behind is structure, enduring, transferable, and ready to be applied. My final, very literal example, my concrete example, if you like, of this would be my son and his love of Lego. Because what I've witnessed in my son, more so than I ever had as a youngster, I had a bit of Lego, but I was about playing with the end product. I was the kind of child that followed steps 1 to 30, built the thing and played with the thing. That is a surface level builder. I can follow instructions. I'm an IKEA guy. I'll do what it says. My son, through his love of Lego and his more abstracted knowledge of a structural level of what the blocks can and cannot do, my son will rip the page up, never mind steps 1 to 30, and he understands creation because he understands the basic structural detail of how to build with Lego, with different blocks, what different blocks can do different things to be structural, to create a foundation, to allow his project to flourish. And that is the best example, Lego is the best example I can give of how we go from something concrete, something obvious and visual, i.e. the 1 to 30 step thing that I have built, to something far more abstracted. My son would look at all those pieces, 100 pieces in 30 steps and go, nah, not for me, Dad. I'll be using those 100 pieces to build this instead. He's a structural builder. I'm a surface level builder. So then, whether I'm in a corporate learning environment, developing training, or whether I'm here in the classroom or out on the sports field, you ask me, Marcus, how are we going to design the fade? I understand the concrete example, the modelled example, give them that particular handout. That makes sense to me. I get that. I can draw the building block for my primary school colleagues. I can draw that on the board for my learners to understand what the number 5 looks like representatively. But what I don't know is how to structure away the fade. Well, first we need to anchor understanding with those vivid, sensory, literal examples like those blocks I've drawn on the board there, or even through story to make the learning tangible. Ground your learners in the what is it that we're doing. Then we move on to prompting some kind of pattern recognition. So stripping away the surface detail and asking questions like, what do you notice that these examples have in common? What stays the same with this example, even when the context changes? So for my 5 building blocks here, I've drawn them on the board. I could have a literal set of 5 building blocks, or I could ask those primary school learners to find 5 literal things in this classroom and put them on one table. Because then the number 5 becomes the thing that's transferring from the board to the table to the room to be collected. So we're working at more of a deeper sense rather than just surface, that's a picture of 5 blocks. We then want to start to encourage metacognitive shifts, so that sense of self-awareness of learners, where abstraction begins to increase and we're asking learners to explain their reasoning. Why have you chosen that particular framework to solve this problem? What is it about this problem that led you to believe that you needed to use that solution? Did it work? Why did it work? What went well? What could have gone better? If you did it again next time, would you do anything differently? If you were trying to advise a peer in another set, or next time we play against a team that play with 3 at the back rather than 4, what would you do that was the same or different? We're encouraging, we're teasing those metacognitive skills from our learners. We then want to start to vary the practice, vary the context to allow positive transfer of the learning piece that you've embedded for your pupils, for your athletes, for your colleagues in the corporate environment, to be able to apply their knowledge in different domains and different contexts. Retrieval of the learning under varied conditions strengthens the long-term retention and the flexibility of application. Understanding why it is that I need to apply that particular solution to this particular scenario. This is really beginning to become nuanced understanding of a concept, an abstracted understanding of a concept, rather than something that's very literal and tangible at surface level. And finally, my last piece of advice is, of course, we need to fade away to reach this abstraction point, but what we should not do is completely remove any support by us, the instructor. As long as we have learners in front of us, we still have a role to play to use subtle external cues and allowing our pupils, our athletes, to maintain a sense of self-efficacy with the smallest amount of support so that we can stretch. We want to be able to empower our learners to be equipped to think and adapt independently. So that could be the constraints that we place upon the drill through our learning design as a coach. As an elite sports coach, we put certain constraints on the drill, on the practice to begin with, to ensure that the correct pattern of play, the correct shape, the correct tempo is set originally. The technical essence of the drill is delivered first and foremost, but then we need to progressively open space for complexity to occur, particularly our open, externally paced sport, like team sports, where an opposition is in place to try and disrupt you. Those disruptions become complex, become challenging, and we've got to be able to replicate that challenge in competitive scenario. So removing the constraints and creating the complexity, creating the abstraction, allows the athlete to participate in a varied environment that really hones in on when they need to select that certain type of pass, when they need to select that certain opportunity to play their patterns, or when not to play their patterns, when to break away from it and use their creativity in the moment. We can only do that by taking the concept of our game strategy, the way we want to play with the ball, and place it in a varied environment so that the abstraction, the essence, has an opportunity to flourish. In a leadership scenario, in a corporate world, our participants may analyze a certain scenario and then discuss how they would have approached it, or different patterns that could have emerged within the choices that they made in that leadership profile that you placed in front of them. But the point is that rather than just rehearsing a singular decision-making framework, you need to be able to work out, ascertain, and analyze, evaluate which decision-making framework should or could have been used in which scenario, and why not, and be super flexible and lateral in our thinking. I've mentioned cognitive load theory already, and I come back to it again here because we know that Sweller reminds us that the building and automating of schematic thought, of building blocks and chains and chunking of information into a coherent piece in the long-term memory, is exactly how we educate our learners, be that on the sports field or be that here in the classroom, to be able to thrive on their own. But concrete examples, like a literal example of the thing, so a modeled demonstration of my passing drill, or the model demonstration of the maths problem on the board, the reading of the stanza structure of a poem out loud by the instructor who understands the rhyming couplets, who understands the nature in which the poem was supposed to be read. They are our entry points for schema development. We can't support the development of complex movement patterns of information unless those entry points have been concrete, have been evidence, have been tangible for the learner. But abstraction is where these schematic profiles that have been logged and encoded in the long-term memory need to become more flexible and transferable. We can't anchor our learners forever to us because that is too needs-based. They need to be able to go out and apply their skills on the sports field without the coach. They need to be able to sit in an exam room and respond to questions without the teacher over their shoulder. So without abstraction, without removing the scaffold, without removing the identifiable object, the concrete thing that supports the learning in the first place, then all our learners can do is at a shallow level recall instances or like one-off ideas rather than being able to apply those patterns of ideas to different scenarios. We need something concrete, something visual to become more symbolic, and then finally move to abstraction.